Just a second to load. There we go. All right. Except I have the wrong one. Just 1 second. Perfect. We're up and running. That's a breath of fresh air there. So tonight's class, it is over extracting and storing data. I'm Jeremy Bergman, Omaha Data Science Academy, the professor for this class. And this class really takes SQL to the next level. Instead of just being able to get data from a table and be able to query the columns and limit the number of rows that are returned or the fields in the records, we are now able to do things like create those structures that are able to store data, even delete those if needed, or creating databases. We can create things called views that we'll see a little more about. And then we can really like store and manipulate data, so we can update data that exists in a table. We can delete records. And near the end of class, we'll also find ways to import data. So we'll pick a data set that we'd like to do and work more with. And then we'll see how can we take that data out of a Excel sheet or CSV file and put that in a database so that we can use the SQL programming language to either query it or update it or manipulate it and store it in different ways. So we are moving fast in learning SQL. So class is structured. We took the quiz the first hour. Actually review the homework here in the third hour. It'll give us time to work on it a little bit more. We will do review what's called data definition language. That's where you can create and modify databases, tables, views, and table constraints. Hour 2, it's actually not SQL functions. We'll learn DML, which is a data manipulation language. That is updates, deletes, inserting new data into tables, how you really get the information into the tables. And then hour 3, we will work on examples and exercises. So we have exercises related around DDL and DML. And then we'll work some more on homework 1 and review the results of that. All right. So class 2, where we just came from our last class, is all about queries. What are the common clauses? We learned some of those that we will use in this class. Learning common aggregate functions like your sums, and even scalar functions where you change single values in table. We can use comments in code, and then we have various SQL function types like aggregate functions and scalar functions too, which include string and date and math and so forth. Right, class 3 objectives. It's talking about DDL, and DML. The first 3 over here on the left side in data storage, really creating and deleting databases, creating and deleting tables and views, create tables with constraints. Those are and even adding and deleting table fields. So think of DDL, your data definition language, is really defining that container and then being able to change that container to hold the data that you need. So you're defining your data, you're defining that structure that you're going to put well-defined data into. So the second part of this is DML. So this would be like adding and deleting. Tables constraints would be DDL, but this would be inserting, updating, deleting data from tables, and importing data from SQL and CSV files. So this includes inserting, updating, and deleting information. So once you have the data inside of that container that you define, the DDL, you use the DML to manipulate it. So inserting, updating, and delete it to manipulate that well-formed data. As we go, let me know if you have questions. You'll commonly hear this in SQL, the terminology here thrown around by people, and they'll use these acronyms. So it's good to know what these are and specifically what our class covers today. So there is actually the structure for the class. Must have had a duplicate slide there. DDL, DML, importing data sets using MySQL workbenches and examples and exercises. So what's the need for data manipulation? We always go back to this question in each slide to track where we're going or really how it applies to this specific lesson. So this applies here in manipulating data and storage and retrieval. So this would be like your DDL and extracting and storing data, defining those tables so you can later retrieve the information, and the DML by adding, removing, or modifying data, which is manipulating data, which is the part of the title of this course. So DMM, data manipulation. Got my own acronym there for a second. Anyway, the first one that we can go ahead and try is creating a new database and schema. So the purpose of this is being able to create. Remember, we were talking about a database being a large container that contained multiple tables, views, stored procedures, and functions. I'll come up with an analogy here. It's kind of like your case of soda. If you get a 24-pack of Mountain Dew, and then you have your that's a little excessive. I usually go with the 12 and it's diet, but getting caffeine either way. We'll have some Red Bull here today. So think of the box as a database, and then within it is your cans. So it's your tables, maybe views would be your labels. And so we'll learn it near the end of the class what stored procedures and functions are. Let's think of it as a container that can hold multiple database objects. So it creates a container for persistent data storage and retrieval and holds database objects. So we're going to create a little database ourselves today within our schema. Just giving a quick description, the classic models database is a retail of scale models, a classic cars database. So just a description of what we're creating. It has typical business data such as customers, products, sales orders, and so forth. So you can see MySQL has this tutorial out there. But, hold on one second. Okay, we're good. It has the example out here, but we're going to create some of this ourselves for our own purposes today. So don't worry about this running this code so much. We'll actually not create the classic models database. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen with everyone. I thought it. Sorry about that, everyone online. I thought I was sharing the class notes with you here. Okay, hold on one second. Let's make sure we're still doing this and verify that everybody can see what I'm seeing. Is that better now? Everybody can see the lecture notes online. And I'll go ahead and put this in presenter view. What's that, Ronnie? Okay. Okay. Something with my mic. We'll fix that up here soon. All right. So here's where we'll create our first table. So the purpose is creating that tabular structure, that well-formed structure for persistent data storage and retrieval. So what I'd like the class to do is to create a table and not using classic models.customers, but use your schema name like -J Bergman customers. And then you'll copy and paste this code into MySQL Workbench from your uh, your from your examples PowerPoint SQL file. It should be in that one. I sent an updated version of that today. And we'll do that here in a second, but I quickly want to describe what's going on with the code. So you can see you have the keywords create table at the top. So that's telling the SQL interpreter to create a table with this under that schema or database dot customers with that table name. And then you're telling it what are all the fields that we want in that table. So customer things like customer number, customer name, last and first name, phone numbers, and so forth. And then you can see I also highlighted in green the data types. Those are the data types that we learned last week. And these are some of the most popular ones. So you have integer, variable character field, so varchar. So that's strings of different lengths that are no longer than 50 characters. You have a character 2, so that's, every field in that or every value in that field is going to have 2 characters. So like state abbreviation is a good example of that. Then you have postal codes, your country, and then sales rep, employee numbers. So you have employee numbers, and then credit limits for the customers. So decimal 10.2, that will give you 8 digits with 2 of them at the end. So we also talked about constraints. This is the first time we'll bring up constraints. So you can tell then when you build a table what information you'll allow into it. So all these that say not null means that no null values can be allowed into the table. So if there's a blank value, it will reject that record and then give you an error message. And we'll see some of that as we go. You have things like default. So if there's no value there, it can default to being null. Because a lot of people won't have an address line 2 necessarily. That's okay. If they don't, we just want it to default to be null. For the state, we could default it to be Nebraska and have every record do that unless otherwise specified. And then we also have a constraint that's called a check. So we want to make sure that all values fall within under a certain range or equal a certain value. So we want to make sure all credit limits that are going into this are less than $1 million. Otherwise, have the table reject it and not insert it into the database. So there are ways you can handle that too, is putting these records in a different table. This is just a way to say, hey, we very want to strictly conform or constrain the data that goes into our table. And then finally, the first time that we're bringing this up is table keys, primary and foreign. You'll see that these will really start to become important starting the next lecture when we do table joins. What a primary key is how you uniquely identify each record inside of a table. And so this primary key has a customer number. That customer number will uniquely identify every record in this table. So say it starts with customer number 1 is Joe Smith, and then another customer enters the system, that would be number 2, and then you have customer number 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so forth. So that key, you don't always need a key for a table, but it's part of being a well-formed table. And then once you join 2 tables, you're likely to either join it on a primary key or a secondary key. So you want this primary key to be defined because you'll start to define those relationships where you join data together, or you join 2 data sets to combine it into one. I'll make sure we don't have any questions on that. Any questions here live before we give this a try? All right, so I am going to share my MySQL workbench. We're going to go ahead and try to create this table in our schema. So stop that for a second. And then I'll get this and make sure everybody who is online is able to see this. So many tabs open. Share the window. MySQL workbench. There we go. All right, it looks like we can see this in StreamYard. Looks pretty good there. Let's check it in StreamYard. All right, it looks pretty good here. Now it takes up the whole screen here from our SQL or examples PowerPoint SQL code. So here's where I do lecture 3, slide 6, creating tables. So the exact same code as we have there. We can go ahead and select it and then run it with this lightning bolt. So you'll know that you're successful. So this doesn't return a result like a query does. This will tell you down here in the action output, and it'll say the statement that you're on. 0 rows are affected because we created a table. They gave you a green check mark.
Okay, were you happy from the examples PowerPoint?
Yep.
SQL,
right, not the class 3 exercises, examples PowerPoint SQL. The class 3 exercises are for the slide at the end of the.
It's just the purple stuff.
What I did was select that whole piece of code.
So just down to the strings.
Yep, down to this final semicolon. Yep. So if you run it and it's successful, you should get a green check mark. And then you could also see it here in your tables. I now have a customers table. And it even tells us what the primary key is, customer number, and then all the fields and data types along with it. Yep, also change it to, I changed it to, yeah, change it. Somebody got an error message. Carmen, you, yes, thank you. Oop, I need to give you the right permission in your schema to be able to create table. If anybody else has that, let me know. but I need to give Carmen.
Break table rental by customers.
And that is why I cannot do that. If anybody has any problems, let me know. I'll give you a minute to run that piece of code.
That's your, yeah, it will match that.
Oh. What's that?
Oh, it says it already exists. You probably did it.
If
You know what I realized though? You have to refresh it. Because I was like, why isn't it showing up? And it's like, you have to refresh it. I learned that. So sometimes, oh, and then if you open tables, there it should show. Yeah, there.
So that's all we did was create.
I was like doing like, some, I think it was like the copying the tables. I was like, why is it different? And I was like, Googling, I was like, just make sure you refresh it. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Sometimes you have to refresh
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure. I'd already
IDE to
created
be
it
able to see it.
from last time.
What's
So
that?
I already
You already created it, so it gave you an error
Yeah.
that it already existed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll learn how to drop tables here pretty soon, which will help. But you could also do that inside of MySQL Workbench. If it already exists, you can right click and drop table, and you can
Click on the little icon and drop table and that will allow you
Yep.
to recreate it.
If you aren't seeing your table, you could perhaps refresh all, like I just did with Douglas, and then he was able to see the table. And you'll see the IDE has all of these options. We're just doing the code version of this instead of creating table this way. It's good to at least learn the code the first time, and I kind of like it anyway because sometimes you can go here and create a table, and then you just have to enter like field after field and check marks and anything, and by the time you're done doing that, you might as well just write the code anyway.
Something doesn't.
Okay, Carmen, go ahead and give that another try to create that table. So it's giving Chris and Bianca errors as well. Okay, let me make sure you have the right access.
Mine stops at 9.
Chris should, and Bianca should. Chris and Bianca, could you send me the error message that you're receiving in the output? Is anybody else able to successfully create it? You did? One thing to make sure with Bianca do bmehan.customers. So define user schema and then dot table name. I see it looks like an error in your code. It would look something. We'll go ahead and post this for everyone. Try that instead what I just posted.
On Slack, what we just posted.
Yeah. For Bianca. Because remember, when you're defining a table, you have to tell the interpreter what database you want to put it in and then the table name that you want. So it's always something dot something.
So mine would just change beyond the we reach to our web.
Chris, go ahead and send me whatever error you have. Or if you have that same one, try to give that a try. That new piece of code should be cjones.customers.
Happening on Slack.
Yeah, this one didn't change it into that nice format. You know what you can do in Slack? You can make it where it's kind of like code. There's an option. I could give Chris a thumbs up. Yep, remember that's how you're defining the database and table. Yay, it's working for everyone.
Well, because I think it was.
Let me go back to the code.
I deleted the old one just to see that it wasn't
Yeah.
from last time I took the class.
Yeah, if the table already exists, it should give you an error message if you were to run that again. It give you an error and then say the message table already exists. It'll give you a pretty straightforward error. So if I was to run this again, yeah. So it gives me an error since it already exists, and it says table customers already exist.
Well, it's just right here. It stops.
Oh, it was a copy from Slack. So yeah, just delete the spaces. Just sometimes
Things copy and paste weird.
Sometimes code editors will ignore stuff like that, and sometimes they won't. It just depends. So yeah, things like this.
See, there's not any tables.
Great. I think pretty much everyone.
But then you didn't refresh it, and that's why now it exists.
Make sure to refresh it in your IDE also. It could say, it could seem like it didn't create, but if you get that green check mark and then it says 0 rows effective, you know it created successfully. But sometimes you have to go and refresh all, and then your table won't show up until then. And don't worry that I have these other tables in here. Those are just from previous classes. Other tables that I've created to store data. All right. I think everyone's good with that one. If not, we can go back and revisit it. Just wanted to give everybody a chance to get their hands on it and really understand what the code was doing. And you brought the database to life. You created your own table, which is pretty cool. All right. Present. You need to go ahead and go back to the slide. Yes. So we just learned about SQL constraints. I went through them quite a bit there in creating tables. But here are all the different constraints. So you can have column constraints to make sure none of the values, such as like making sure none of the values in the column in any of the rows are null. You can do default value. You can make sure that they're all unique values. Index is more of like a database administrator thing. So like if you have a huge table of like 1 million rows, you can index it by year, and then you could write queries to get parts of the table a lot faster. So it's like indexing the table to be able to write queries faster. You may eventually come across that as a data analyst, so I included it in there. And then you have table constraints. So these are the table constraints where you're defining a primary key, that one value that uniquely identifies each row in a database table. A foreign key uniquely identifies a row record in any of the key, but a foreign key is usually something that uniquely identifies how it connects to. I describe this. Give a good example in describing it. So foreign key, you could have a foreign key on one table and then join that with a primary key of another. A foreign key is like a secondary key of a table that's not a primary key. So come up with a good example. So maybe you have customers, you have customer ID, and maybe your foreign key would be, it wouldn't be invoice count, it wouldn't be invoice number. Have to do something like zip code could probably be as foreign key, because then you have another table with zip code in it that's a primary key, and then you could join it to that foreign key. You could do something like that. So the zip code would join to the zip code table would join to the zip codes on the customer record. And then a check constraint is like what we saw, where you check that the values in a column satisfy certain conditions. And this would be a really good one to see the different examples here and just get a lot of examples to tutorial spot. Go ahead and click on that. Has really good descriptions. It also your example. And it even gives a foreign key description. Oh, because I'm not sharing my. I'm reading through it, but then I realized that I'm not sharing it online. But you can click on that anyway. You could click on that link, and it gives you some really good examples of how constraints are used and how they could tie together with other tables. All right. So we'll work ourselves here to break pretty fast. I just want to cover a couple more slides. So we'll go ahead and go back to what I was sharing. Okay, there we go. Back to the lecture slides. Right. So not only do you have the ability to create a table, you can modify it once it already exists, or you can delete it or drop the table. So the keywords there are modify and drop, a tabular structure from the database. So you can do this with database objects. You can modify or alter views. You can modify and alter stored procedures or functions. We're just going to do this on tables so you get the basic idea. So if you were to run some of these, and we'll do these in a second, you could add a table or alter the table customers. So you're telling the interpreter is to go to the table, look at the table customers, and then add a column named column name with this data type. And then it'll appear here as another field in your table right at the very end of the table. So you already had your existing fields, and you'll just append it to as the last field. You can also drop a column, so you can alter that. You can drop it, and then if you were to refresh it, that column would go away. We'll do that in a second. And then you could do also things like drop constraints on a table. So you can give an alias to the primary key, and you can drop a constraint. That could be useful if you're just restructuring a table in general, although if I'm to that point, I usually create a new table, but it's something you can do. And then delete. So if you drop a table named customers, then it drops it from the database. So this if exists, it's just a condition keyword. It's a condition that allows you to see if it exists. If you were to run this and customers doesn't exist, it'll just give you, if you've ever done programming, is if you have this if exists, you'll run it up to that point, and if there's an error, it won't stop the execution of the SQL program. It'll keep running the rest of it. Like in code, if you have something that's just a check versus an error. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this. In MySQL Workbench, I try to get through DDL here before break so that we can have a little bit more time on the other side to do some work. So I'll go ahead and share MySQL Workbench. Just 1 second. It's easier just to share the entire screen. All right. Everyone can see it here, just making sure everyone can see MySQL Workbench who's online. Try to string here. I think everyone can go ahead, and I have been sharing, but then it's harder for me to tell if everybody's can see it. But anyway, lecture 3, slide 8, modifying and deleting tables. So we would take a look at this. So right now you click on this. I'll actually give you information about the database object, which is a table named customers. So you currently have those fields. If you run this code alter table, and then this is where it'll be like most important to refresh, because you see it ran this code successfully, but you don't see this down here that it added the field. If you refresh all, cross my fingers that appears, I'll be pretty sure. Oh, yep, it did. When we refresh, now there's a new field column name. You can see it in that window for those of you who have MySQL Workbench. And then if you refresh, you now see that column name that has a variable character 255 of length 255 defined, just like we did here in column name. Right, now we can drop that same column by doing alter table. So you aren't deleting the table or dropping the table, you're just altering the table structure, and specifically the column structure, or you can do it with primary keys too, and dropping constraints. So if we are to drop column here, and then you say alter table, and then right below it drop that column name. If we refresh this table,
And you did that on the workbench
yep.
after you copied it over top the where you created the table.
What's that?
You
Ronnie?
copied it and pasted it in the workbench over top of the.
Oh, this one. So I'm pulling these from the example PowerPoint SQL. Is that what you're looking at, Ronnie?
No, I didn't. Oh, that was pulling from the Slack.
Oh, did you pull it from Slack? Yeah, there's a version of it still in there. Most of my updates today were making sure that it just had like the right lecture and slide numbers on it, since I updated the slides a little bit. So it should be either in Slack or an updated examples PowerPoint SQL file that I sent everyone today in Slack. And now when I refreshed after running that alter table statement, you can see that field's not there anymore. So I'll give everybody a second and let you run that. I'll look for anybody here online who has any questions, or if they haven't running it, just let me know. Those should work since we were able to create table. Those should work fairly seamlessly, but you never know. Create a constraint on the table. No, that's okay. We could do something like as this guy. I think that should work. So you can, like we did with fields, you can give an alias to tables in your from statement, or you can give an alias. You can also give an alias to your primary key, and it doesn't look like it actually likes that. So what's the syntax for that? I'm just scrolling down here real quick to see if I have an example of the syntax. And I don't. Let me look that up real quick. Even I do things all the time, but then I forget the syntax because I'm going back and forth between databases. I remember it for one, but not another. Suffice to do.
But when I take it from the other one, paste it on the top
Oh.
of, you know, there we go.
Yeah, and then you can just run it as its own piece of code. So I'm going to let me try to get this. So Stack Overflow is great for this, or W3 schools. What I'm looking for, though. For syntax. Here we go. That's how you do it. You do constraint, and then you get here. You actually give the constraint a name. So it would look like this. And that's even a better example because then it works with the code. Yeah. Okay, let me show you what this does now. So in relational databases, you can define a primary key. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the table, and then we could give that constraint a name. So you were defining the table to tell it like what is that field that uniquely identifies all the records in the table.
Oh,
So it's like
okay.
constraining.
So like every record will have this field, like or birth or something like you're connecting fields or room.
Yeah. So what the primary key? So the customer number, that will give all the customers a unique number,
Okay.
like customer 1, 2, 3, 10, and
defining what information can uniquely define each record separately.
yeah,
Okay.
through the whole table.
Okay.
And then when you define that primary key, you can give it a name.
So you jump from adding a column name to dropping a column name to then altering the table.
Yep.
with a constraint.
And then dropping constraint, which is where Melinda was at. So yep. So now I could create this table this way, and that's a better example to just give it a constraint. And when I do this now, this should work right here. Then it says it doesn't exist. I'll get that to work anyway. But the idea is that you can drop constraints on the table. So don't worry about that drop constraint too much. I hardly ever.
Is there, can you share a little bit more about what is the deployment done? I understand that constraints in each of the, when we define each of the fields, because it's like, we want stuff that's not in this.
Think of a primary key as a specific constraint. Like it constrains that field to having all unique values that uniquely identify all the rows in the table.
Oh, it's saying we need this table to assign have an ID number for each record.
Yeah. Database and really like tightly defining the data that's going into it is that you define a primary key that you can join with other tables and that uniquely identifies each row on the table. Now the table doesn't actually have to have a primary key, but that's like even more than a best practice. It's just kind of like something that you generally should do with tables so that you can join them with other tables. And it, yeah. Yeah, so you'll probably find like say a system doesn't record things very well, like or say like somebody just changed their name or something and you wanted to keep the old record and you want to keep the new record too. Maybe you would create it as a new customer name. Or you would what am I thinking here? Maybe you'd create it as they'd get a new customer ID, or you would define a new primary key, like something like customer ID and date updated or something like that. So it'd say like here's an old customer and here's a new customer. You could do that. You can have a compound primary key with more than one field also. Usually people try to design tables where a single column uniquely identifies in the class, but it makes it a little bit easier to manage too. Or social security number or something more straightforward. Let's see, I think maybe we have somebody here. Anybody have a hard time running any of it too much? I just explained it out loud in a little more depth than I go into in the notes, but it's a good question. So we jumped into it. So I want to do one more slide before we go on break. I've been talking here for a while. Oh, Bianca can't get it to work. Which part? The drop constraint. This isn't going to work for. It won't work for any of you because I didn't include that in the table, in the create table statement. So is there, Bianca or Carmen, is there anything other than just ignore this drop constraint for now? Do these three parts for you, the alter table, the add column, deleting the column, and dropping the table, do those all work for you? And note that the first time I dropped it, since it exists, it gave me exists along with it. Without the if exists, it would just give me an error. So that's why you drop a table that doesn't exist. Oh, Bianca wants to share her screen. Okay, go ahead. I will let you have it. Let me remove myself. Oh, not remove myself. There's.
Can you see it?
I'm stopping the screen here.
I'm trying to help you deal with it. No,
Sorry for that, everyone.
I stand here to keep you under manners.
It's okay. We can go. We can take a break, and then I can show you if you need me to.
The little kids keep out strength. Don't be deceived by the facade.
So in order to stop ourselves getting associated with criminals, we are going to become criminals.
at the stage. Bianca, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I think here in StreamYard, you should have, since you're added into the screencast, you should have an option to present below.
Can you see
And then
it?
if you do, you can present and share your screen. If you don't have the same option, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, it says I'm sharing, so can you see my screen?
Oh, I have to add this one to stage. I see your share. Then I add to the stage. Yep. There we go.
So,
Okay, I can see
okay,
it.
so here's my table. Here's my table creation, right? And it worked because it's all over there.
Yeah.
But then, like, I don't have a clue if I
Yep.
did any of that correct. Because when I mean, it gives me.
Okay, so yep. So it gave you an error there because it looks like that table already exists. One way you can tell, you can see the customers table there under your schema. So,
Yeah.
under B Meehan
Oh,
under your database. So that
okay, right
exists
here.
already. So that first part worked okay. So if you also expand columns, okay. So right now you don't have the column name in there. So go ahead and run that piece of code that's at 18 and 19. All right, so that works. So
Okay.
that should have added a column name.
I think I know what I did. I wasn't choosing it. So I think okay. I wasn't choosing it because every time I
Oh, were
hit
you
this, it
just
wouldn't do anything. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's what was happening. So it looks like it worked.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, the lightning bolt, but it's the what the left
Okay.
lightning bolt. If you select it and then run it, it just runs that piece of code.
Okay. That's what I was doing. You were breaking up, so I didn't hear half the stuff you just said, but it's okay. They're green. That's all I care about. So,
Like
all
another,
right. Thank you.
we'll still get another like 10 minutes or so. We'll be back at 7:52, about 10 minutes from now. All right, see everyone then. I need to. No. Okay. One of the keys for me is to make sure everybody, the whole class gets it.
Well, yeah.
Take a little more time to do that. Especially these fundamental parts up front. Grab some bananas too. This bought them like yesterday, but they need to eat them already. It's close. Not much of a baker though. That's my middle daughter's awesome at it. I'll let her have it.
I brought you like that, yeah. Make something.
She's the only one in her family who can do it. I make dinner like every night, so if I don't bake. That's okay. Do that. I might take a baking class. I don't know why I'm terrible at it. I just burn it. Missing ingredient. Takes.
I want to, but I don't have patience in it.
I feel like it takes more patience.
I'm like, well, that was an entire waste. I get too angry. And so,
My daughter, though, she.
Make like one here. And then what if it's bad? I never.
My daughter does. She will burn something, and she's like a little scientist, like figuring out like what to do next time. She's already like thinking of what she'd do better, problem solver, or what ingredient she forgot or substitute. You have to follow the directions a lot better than just like say grilling steak or stir fry or something. Daughter is going to make next to soda bread. She said it is easy. I don't know.
And is there an Irish soda bread for our Irish bread or something? My friend's birthday was just at St. Patty's Day. We had angel fruit cake and strawberries and honey with topping or whatever. So we got a piece of the Irish bread. I didn't try it. So
it's like, I don't know if I can explain it properly, but it's more like airy because it's made with, I believe it's made with club soda or baking soda.
Yeah.
Not club soda. Whatever. But it's like more like open forest, right? Where you use for a bread, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
I think it's more like that. And it can be, it doesn't have to like rock.
I should have tried it. Is everybody online then? Because it's just us two? Local?
Yeah.
I think I should try and pay attention. Wait, I mean, I have to make it so it's
Douglas, he just headed home to do the rest of it online.
I was like,
Right.
And said about being class and just focused on that one thing.
But I'm so used to like two screens, big screens, and then I have big, and so I may try it for my office, depending on what my schedule is on Wednesday. Just so I don't have to set up all this, you know, I could log in, but I'm afraid I'd be in OPS's network and I'd be blocked from something, so that's why I get off campus, you know, because this isn't blocked.
I should put in an order for that monitor Melinda has,
Yeah,
or
that's what
what
mine-
you
that's
have running.
what mine is.
or just go get it. Actually, I probably.
Yeah.
So hold it up, mine just kind of messing up. Like it's nice, but like I can't use it like when I'm like building websites. I can't use it as like this is what it looks like. 'Cause the resolution size is completely off, and I even figured out in like the Tableau class I started new, I like put it to public, and I was looking at it on here, and I'm like, why is it skewed? Why is it not showing it the way I designed it?
Yeah, I wonder if you have HDMI.
I don't know, because I like kept messing around with it, and then I just looked on my computer, it's fine. So it just, it's really skewed, so it's good with like half or moving things, but
So we had to do training on building our schedules on campus. So they took us down and back to do it, but we had to bring just our back.
Portable monitor.
Scheduling the two screens, like having class sizes in this up and then drag and drop, you know, to be able.
I was
Where's
switching
our
between
two
tabs
screens? So then
and windows, oh my gosh.
And then a couple of us were bringing that, it's like, and our district supervisor had one of these, it's like, well, why didn't you buy one of these for all of us? Because we're always working, you know, you could
And
pull.
they're nice and portable, and I got a second like power cord for my laptop, so I don't have to take that out.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Mhm.
so that's-
Yeah.
See a few for 110, but with what you're saying, I'd probably spend a little more on it.
My second monitor. It is also not like a real resolution, but it's like I have to turn it on with the remote.
Right,
It's
right,
like
right.
actually a TV. I'm like, oh, this is great for like another just stream for like. Stuff.
Well, last year I built my schedule on my 75 inch TV screen, you know, 6 foot in front of my desk. I could blow it up, drag and drop because you couldn't change the resolution of the thing. Well, if you put it up there, I could easily drag and drop and see that or move it. Because sometimes just getting the thing and grabbing it right is so much easier, you know. So I'm so used to multiple monitors that looking and flipping through tab. I'm like, no, I gotta have that here. So I've got StreamYard over here, the Slack here, and the yeah. But I have to do this year around, but I got all my other stuff. So.
Could really use.
That has a nice spot for this one. Finally, because I bought this like last year. I didn't have it. This is actually pretty. This is actually.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure there were but I don't know.
Just need another monitor right here so I can flip and keep track of what's on
I mean,
StreamYard.
but I guess you don't have another way to like attach it. Otherwise, I would say I don't absolutely need it, but it is.
I do consulting too, so I'm always on the move and
Right.
not having to haul around a second monitor or try to find a place to plug in all the time would be huge.
Yeah.
I don't know where that's been I didn't realize it, where it's been my whole life. Not my whole life, but if I would have known about this type of thing, I would probably already got it. I know about tablet PCs and stuff,
Right.
but that's different. Okay, let's get started. So restarted here so we can go ahead and get the exercises and some work and go over homework too. All right, so the last part of DDL is a view. The purpose of a view is like a virtual table based on a record set of an SQL statement, SQL statement, saved as a database object for further data creation and extraction. So if that sounds technical, we can simplify that a little bit. So Basically, how I've had it explained to me is it's just like saving a piece of code as an object in the database, like you'd save a table. So you could create a view as world.countries Asia as a query that you created. So you can see this query, little piece of code, select table name, and it's Asia. And then how you can then reference a view like you do a table. You could say select country because you define that up there in the view from your world.view countries Asia. So this is like a virtual table that you created where the country is in India, China, and Nepal. So views, so I wanted to explain that to really get a good feel for what a view actually is. So views have the following properties. It is a name derived table. So when you think of it, when you run a query, you get a tabular result set. That's really just like its own tabular data set. It's not actually a table that's stored in the database until you've created that structure and put the data there, but it is a tabular format, and a view takes that tabular format and reproduces it. Since it's an object, you can create, alter, and drop views. The data is not stored itself, which is what I was saying. You run it like a query. It's not actually in a table, but you can reference the view like it's a table. So like a virtual table. And the query must be run every time it's needed. So the data's not stored. You just run it on the database. And it's used to call up data without changing its underlying base tables. So you don't have to create a table or do anything to it. And really, like I was saying, it's how is the best way explained to me. It's like you could save a piece of code and then you could rerun it using this world.countries Asia reference like it's a table. So let's go ahead and do that. We will, I don't know, it doesn't look like I have that. No, I do have the code here. It's a little bit out of order. I'll go ahead and share the screen. Just 1 second. Having two monitors, I could flip through this super fast. Let's see. Let's share. Share MySQL Workbench. Also need to. Okay, MySQL Workbench. Go ahead and share that. It's on line 108. So lecture 3, slide 13. Create the view.countries.asia view using that query. So we'll go ahead and create that in your schema and then dot view name or your object name like we did with the table. And then you say the as because you're creating it as this query. So if you go ahead and do that and you run the lightning bolt, I already have it exist, but it should be green for everybody else.
So the table name, do we have to change the table name?
Nope.
Not because it's taken whatever.
Yep. Just change my name over to your schema name. You'll be able to create it.
In a way,
Actually, it wasn't even in mine. You can go, instead of the tables in your database, you can go to views. And views just another database object like a table. there should be a view countries Asia.
Yep.
And even to see that it works, you can just do a select rows, and then it's just running.
Is see, I'm missing the backward you ran.
This code right here.
Yeah, when you ran it in.
I just ran it in this tab. Already exists. Otherwise, you should get.
But actually, is what you should select. Otherwise, you should get one.
Give you a green check mark and zeros returned. Zeros affected. If it runs successfully, that's what you're looking for, Ronnie? Okay, so
Yeah.
that green check mark now, I dropped it and then recreated it. And now I get a green check mark. Now, once we have that in a view, we can use it like it's a table. So you can select a field, name country, from your schema dot view name. And I always start these with VW because that way you know it's a view in the database as opposed to a table. Because it can seem like a table if it's like just countries in Asia. And there's some value in knowing whether it's a view or it's a table that already has pre-stored data. Even in some companies, they'll have you name all of it, give them a VW to start or a TBL to start to tell the difference between like a table or a view or SP for stored procedure. It's all like database administrator's preference, but I just do that to keep track of things too. Then you could use that as like it's a table starting at line 115. So if you do this and then you filter the rows where countries just in China, India, and Nepal, those are 3 results you get. So this is almost like a query within a query. So you do your base query and store it in a view, and then you can do another query on top of it. Did anybody have problems with that? And Carmen, I saw that you were having a problem a little while ago. Sorry I missed this, but you were having a problem with the last query that we had with like modifying and deleting tables. Were you ever able to fix that? Sweet, we can keep moving.
So the view itself is like a snippet, and that you can say the same thing there, but when you want to use it to pull information directly itself,
Yep. I should say that the view itself will always, there's no data stored behind it. You have to run it every time to get the data. And where a table is the container that just has all the data in it already. Virtual table, but it is like that. It's not in that tabular format. Really useful. I'll jump into it a little bit. I use views a lot for data analysis, just for like different cuts and slices of different tables. Say you just want certain columns. In business intelligence or analytics, like how you define data is really important. Like because oftentimes you'll define something and then people ask you a bunch of questions about it. They'll say, well, how did you get that? I don't know if that makes sense. Or how did you define this measure? And then you could just go back to the view and say, this is how we defined it. Is that a good definition, or should we define it a different way? Becomes really important to we'll do joins in the next class, and like when you start joining tables together and how you're defining those and your calculations and everything, how you're bringing them together and defining your calculations. You could put that in a view and then you remember it. Really important for metrics in this way. Do you guys agree with that or not? And if they don't, you could always change it. At least you know what the definition is. So I save things in views a lot, and it just so you don't have to keep writing SQL code, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot like how we defined this in the first place. And you can just run these, and then you have those calculations. It's a good way to reference. Yeah, you could create. So now we're going to start moving into. Stop my screen. Okay. Now we're going to move into DML, or data manipulation language. These are like inserts and deletes and updates of data that's already stored within tables. Okay. All right, it looks like everyone online can see it. So data manipulation, starting with manually inserting values into a table. So the purpose is to store persistent values that allow for the creation and extraction of data. We say persistent, I've mentioned that a couple times. So the data is stored in there, whether you restart the database or you end a session or whatever. Once you put the database in that canister, it stays there until someone deletes a table or deletes a record or something like that. So the purpose of manually inserting it is so that it keeps that record in the database. Particularly important if you have a system that stores customer information, or you want to store running history for analytics purposes, like stock prices on certain days. You could insert a record each day, and then you have that rolling persistent history that accumulates. So that's really one of the biggest values, is that you can store historical data in it also. So how that's accomplished, you can do it using an insert into, and then this will be your schema name .customers, and then you'll define the order in which data is inserted column by column. And then you can do this two ways. You can either do it by values, or you can do it by a query. So this first one, we'll just do it by values. So you have the first one, it'll be customer name or customer number, and then you have customer name, and then contact last name, contact first name, phone number, address line, so forth. Whatever order you put these into an insert, you need so let's go ahead and try to go ahead and run that in MySQL. Just while we're doing this, go ahead and we'll go ahead and share my. Yeah, we're creating this one ourselves, this data ourselves.
So we got to type it. They're just like, no, it's in there.
Yeah, it will be in that SQL file, and I'll show you a trick when
Oh,
we
the
start.
examples,
Yep.
the case statement.
Yep.
Example or the PowerPoint.
Oh, in the PowerPoint SQL or SQL PowerPoint file.
I'm down to lecture 3, slide 13, and then it goes to lecture 4.
Hold on, everyone, getting over to MySQL Workbench.
Line 57. Oh, yeah.
All right, yeah, I changed the numbers on it, but then I forgot to change the order of the way they were in the file. Okay, should be sharing my MySQL Workbench now. So we will go and in the file a little bit, so you can see we can drop the table if we don't want to drop the table. So line 73, lecture 3, slide 9, although that's a different number also. Customers table or your schema table. Now we can do those, take those columns and then insert these values into them. Now the constraints are important because if you were to add values that shouldn't go into the database, it would reject those. So make sure that those never get there in the first place. I just need to recreate this table. Okay, I recreated that table. And now you have your well-formed table. These values should be acceptable that you're inserting in there. It gave me a check mark, so it said that was successful. And this one actually gives you another message since you're impacting rows within a table. It says 2 rows are effective, records 2, and that's really like important once you start doing, if you do updates or deletes, like they'll tell you how many records were deleted or how many fields were, how many rows were updated.
So would I have to do this?
What did that say, Ronnie?
Customer number is not. I gotta make sure my action output and reading.
I could give you this right here, Ronnie. Here's what the table should be. I'll paste the code. There's a little thing to turn this into code.
So yeah, I have the customer in columns. Because it's the original customer code we created, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, it just takes time to run, so if I have the green checkbox in line 1, I'm good at action output.
Yep.
So that line 1 is the most recent action output.
One. So it goes in order, increasing order.
Two rows have to do that. It's like,
Yeah, and then if I refresh all, should appear here.
so go into the customer tables, do a refresh all.
And then you could select the rows. right click and select rows. And then you see those 2 records that we inserted into it.
Right click and select rows.
Yeah, so I went to the table, and just a quick thing that you can do in MySQL Workbench is right click it and select rows to be able to quickly see without it writing a query. That is one thing I do quite a bit.
Okay.
Instead of writing a query, that's like a quick way to see what's in the table.
Now to view my output. Let's see.
So everyone else, did that work for them? Everybody on StreamYard?
Great. Oh, wait.
That's weird. I think it must have to do something with like your screen. Something with your screen or something.
Because like right there selected 2 rows returned, so that's what I'm seeing.
It looked like it works. It's just
Right.
how your
Is this
screen is displayed.
there? See, that's what I was trying to.
I have one that looks like that over there. It's like a result.
Right, now let's see if I pull this, let's see if I pull this back over here. There
Well,
it
then you
is, so
see
it
it's
is.
a resolution on your
Yeah,
screen.
just want to make sure.
When I buy that new portable screen, I'm gonna have to make sure I get a high resolution one. Pay a little bit more for it.
Well, and I wonder if I can change the settings.
You probably can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So maybe I should put my Slack there, workbench on this one, not this one.
I'll go ahead and share that in StreamYard. Stop screen. Oh, if I can stop it, there we go. Go ahead and share the PowerPoint again. Okay. So we have inserting values in a table from a query. So exact same thing, but instead of insert like right again, when we did that in the last class where we copied the table, this is what we actually did. So we did an insert into a table, and then we just selected the data from another table to put into it. So actually in this one, we created a table with schema.us. We have date, cases, and deaths. This is COVID-19 data. We did that once right after the pandemic started for class, and it's an interesting project. So we created that, and then we could insert into jbergman.us the date, the cases, and deaths. So this is a sum of all of the deaths on those days from the COVID-19.us table. And then you can see the result the same way. You can select star from the table that you created. I think this time, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this one. It's really the same as storing the values instead of creating that table and inserting into. I think everybody will get it. This is one that we'll spend a little more time on. So we want to update an existing value in a table. So the purpose is to take data that's persistent, or sometimes take that data or sometimes missing values in a table based on known changes to the data set or profile. So say you had null value about somebody's age, customer's age. They suddenly give it to you one way or another. Say I want to go, now that I have that information, now I want to go update the customer's age in the database. You can do an update statement. So how these clauses work is that you say update your schema dot table where your persistent, and then you say your set where city is equal to Omaha and state is equal to Nebraska. So the set is what you want to update in the table. And then you say where customer number is equal to 103. So the where statement, like it's the same as you did in a query. It limits the number of records that you're looking at or you return in a set. So for this one, you just look at customer 103, and then you change city to Omaha, and then state to Nebraska. So we will go ahead and run this one because it's good to look at this before and after. Go ahead, share my screen, share my MySQL Workbench on the screen. Okay. Just 1 second. I was hoping that we'd have more time to do the class 2 exercises. To give everyone a heads up, there's not really a homework for this one other than just running the practice exercises at the end and playing around with the data and giving me, I'll accept a couple screenshots of what you're able to do with update statements and delete statements and so forth. Need to share my SQL Workbench. There we go. Okay, so everyone sees right now we have city. We have a value for city, but we don't even have a state in there. So it looks like a foreign country like or France, actually. So we want to update that. We want to give it good old Omaha, Nebraska. So we can take, let's see. If you do a select star from customers, if you run this update statement, notice how city and state will change on customer 103. So you do this, it says one row was affected because it matched customer number 103. And then if we run this again, what the table looks like, we change the city of that to Omaha. Now I will say these are like some of the most risky things that you can do on a database is updating values and deleting values to put in a wrong where or do something that you didn't expect. And then you're in the business of trying to recover values and things. And another table first, and then running like updates and deletes on it to see if it's the result that you actually want. So that copy into, and then using a query, copy into some table, and then even selecting star from customers like we did, or selecting star from a table like we did in the last class. I think that's like just really valuable from a safety perspective. Because once you do data manipulation like this, if you change the value then and it's not what you intended, it could have big consequence. And
There's not
Maybe
that
even worse.
delete or that go back.
There can be, depending on how there is, you can roll back. You can roll back a database if the database administrator has it set up that way.
Same.
Even worse than the business consequence is maybe the DBA consequence. it's probably not actually, but you feel the wrath of a DBA for doing something like that. And if they're well prepared, they'll have a backup for it. They almost always have backups. That's their job, but you don't want to make them grumpy with that type of stuff. So always be safe when you're doing these operations. Is everybody able to update? I'll try to move through these last few slides pretty fast so we have a little bit of time to work. Just raise your hand if something doesn't work for you. Okay. Share. That's one thing that'll be nice about having the second screen is that I can just flip things to the other screen instead of having to flip the sharing back and forth. So delete record is the same thing. So the purpose is to remove and delete records in a table. So I don't know which one's worse, is if you delete a bunch of records that you weren't supposed to delete, or you update stuff to like the wrong value. Maybe actually updating the stuff the wrong value. Depends. But you can see it could be dangerous either way. But it exists for a reason. Maybe you want to delete records out of a table because they're invalid or not needed anymore. So an example of this would be you use the delete from clause and your schema.table, and then you have the where to focus on what record, and then where customer number is 112. So what this will do, I won't run this piece of code, but you can imagine it'll take this record and it'll delete it out of the table to leave only that first record in the table. I actually don't know which one's worse. I guess it really depends on what you're doing.
That would be if you were just trying to find unique.
What's that?
If you were just trying to find unique customers.
With the delete? Finding unique customers? Oh, if you deleted like all the unique customers. We will actually do something a little bit later in cleaning the data after we get through the basics, where you could find duplicates, and then you could delete all the duplicates out of the table. That could be useful even if it's not a duplicate on the primary key. Maybe you just go through and there are like 10 Ronnie Huertas in there for some reason, and you only need like one record. Yeah, you'll do this for whenever when you delete data, you just have to make sure you have a backup, or make sure what you're you're safe with deleting and you're being intentional. It's always good updating or deleting is to copy it into another table and then practice it first, whatever you're trying to do, and see what the code's going to do. You can never go wrong with that. And I don't know how many times even like I tested it and then I just sweat when I do it in production, like a production system, like a running system, and I run a deleter and update. It makes me anxious, for mostly because of the stuff I've done in the past. So that's why I bring it up. Say, don't be like on your first day in the job, don't do that. Delete a bunch of records out of the table, or you might not be a data analyst for very long. You probably would be somewhere else, but depends on how much they like you too. But it could have big repercussions. All right, so last part of the day is how to import a data set. So there's more than one way you can do that in MySQL. The one that we will do today is importing a CSV file using the MySQL file import tool. I'm going to leave this as an exercise here for the end of class. But the next slide will take you through steps on how to import a data set. And then you'll have to, as you go through the wizard, you'll have to define a table schema. And it'll make more sense when we go through the steps. Second, you can import a SQL file and then insert values the way that you saw earlier. So this is an option that works really well sometimes. And there's a website that you can use to, if you give it a CSV file, it will create that insert to you with all the value statements underneath of it. So that's really useful. It's say you have 10,000 records in a CSV file. There's no way that you're going to key all those values into like 10,000 insert statements. But there are tools out there like in Table Convert that will just generate the code for you, which is awesome. And that can be a good way to do it. Import data too. This one isn't available because we're doing this in the cloud, but there are also some command line features you use on your computer. If you go to the command prompt, I've imported data that way before in the past, writing little scripts. We won't do that in this class, but just an awareness that exists as another tool where somebody can help you out with it can make a difference. So just bringing awareness to all the 3 different ways you can import data. So there's a data import into MySQL. This is using the utility in importing demographic data for use with the COVID-19 data set. And I might actually make this would actually be a good homework exercise. So I'm going to put some data in here. Yeah, you could import whatever data. I have just some data already set up. So here's something that would be common. We'll make this the homework. Import and I'm putting this in Slack right now. That's why it's quiet. Import demographic data into MySQL using the import utility. So the import utility, as you go through it, it will ask you what table you want to create, like what the table name is, if the columns look okay, and so forth. Here's a step. So you want to take a look at the data set first, the one I pasted there. So I have a PDF file that describes all the columns in the demographic data set. And then you could see the data types in there. And then you'll define and create a table based on those columns. You'll go to the table table data import wizard, tongue twister. Within that, you select CSV file. You select a destination, which is the schema.table name. You configure the import settings. These are the recommended settings, and then you import the data. So I'll show you how you can do this in MySQL Workbench real quick. I'll give you a quick example to not leave everybody hanging. So stop that share. share MySQL Workbench. There we go. Okay, I believe we're back. We're back with MySQL Workbench. So the import utility is under server and data import. So you'll want to import this file that I put in Slack, that CO estimated 2019 all data raw. That's census data by zip code. And you will point it to import from dump project, import from self-contained file. And then you're able to, no, that's not right. I'm doing something. I went to the wrong place here. Maybe good for me to walk through this too. Import. So, import options. Network. I actually haven't done this in a while, so good exercise for me too. If we take this file from Slack, I can point it to my file here. My data. Homework assignment. Let me go back and read the instructions 1 second. Nice data import using data creation wizard. There is a video on the slide on how to import. And I just hear from the menu, so and I'm going to get back to everybody and do a little demo at the beginning of the next class. All right. go ahead and show you the code. It's all about the stuff that we learned in class today. That will answer your questions and give you examples that already exist. It's called Class 3 Exercises. I dropped that into Slack today, and these answer each one of the questions. So you won't be able to create this schema missing persons, but you can do J. Bergman or your own schema. The use statement just points you to that schema that you want to use, and then you can create a person table in that schema. You don't have to have the schema dot table name because the database already knows that you're using J. Bergman. That's what's useful about that use statement at the beginning. Then you can do things like alter table by adding a new column into it. You can insert values. Little statement just in case it's not letting you delete values from the table. It should though. Deleting records, updating records, and so forth. Feel free to really play around with it and add your own values in, and then delete things. That's where you'll get the most value out of this exercise. Doing it. All right. And that brings us to the end of class. Oh, you can't hear me? Dang. All right. Can anybody hear me now? No. Let's see. Have the worst luck. Okay, my microphone should be working. I think it works. Anybody online? At the stage. Is that working now when I add you, Chris, to the stream?
Yeah, we can hear you again.
Yeah, did we miss that last slide where I was talking about the exercises?
I think we came in towards the end of it. We missed probably about 5 minutes back now, in there somewhere.
Okay, I'll cover it one more time real quick. So the exercises here at the end of class 3, they're really just to try to do the different things that you did in this class, like creating a schema, creating a table. I like those strongly typed into deleting records, updating records. Everything we learned today, it's a missing person schema. You'll use your own schema name in it, but it's all in class 3 exercises, the answers to each, but really be creative with this one. How you learn the best here is adding different fields and then inserting different values and updating different things. This is one that you can really play around with and see what you do, things that you delete or updating it. So I'd highly recommend just like not just taking this code and running it and looking at it, but really playing around with it, with the different things that you can do to be creative with it. All right, so that's it for this lecture. The next lecture is joining and merging data. I give a heads up there at the end on what's coming up. That's when we start blending or merging data, joining data together to data sources with primary keys to form new data sets, or merging and appending data. So taking data and making a longer data set out of it. So that's it for today's lecture. I want to take as much time as I can here to go over homework 2 or let anybody work on homework 2. And then I will provide everyone feedback on their assignments, finish grading, and provide everyone feedback on it. So I'm going to end the stream here with the end of class 2 and with that lesson being next week or on Wednesday, and much more forward to look forward to you and continuing to build on our SQL knowledge. So go ahead and end stream.